When a retired man finds his dog buried in cement, he discovers his late wife's secret research that could change medicine forever. Now he must fight a powerful corporation to save his town. Will this unlikely hero succeed? Subscribe and comment where you're watching from. The morning sun cast long shadows across the modest houses of Oak Ridge, Arkansas, a town small enough that gossip traveled faster than the internet. At 75, Harold Dawson had settled into a comfortable routine since losing Martha 3 years ago. Every morning began the same. Coffee on the porch at 5:30 a.m., the local paper by 6 o'clock, and Scout's morning walk by 6:30, rain or shine, summer or winter. Scout was no ordinary companion. The 9-year-old German shepherd moved with the dignified grace of an animal who had witnessed both joy and sorrow alongside his master. His muzzle had grayed over the years, much like Harold's own thinning hair, but his amber eyes remained alert and watchful. "Come on, old boy," Harold muttered, his voice gruff with the remnants of sleep as he clipped on Scout's leash. Same route as always. The late May air hung thick with humidity, promising another scorching southern summer. Harold's weathered hands, mapped with veins and spotted with age, gripped his walking stick, carved from oak by Martha before the cancer took her. His tall, lean frame moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had nowhere particular to be, yet had a destination in mind. Their route took them past Mrs. Bernice Taylor's Victorian home, its garden already meticulously tended despite the early hour. Past the elementary school where Harold secretly maintained the playground's flower beds when budget cuts eliminated the groundskeeper position. And finally, toward the old Thompson Meadow, 50 acres of undeveloped woodland and wildflowers that had been the town's unofficial park for generations. As they approached the meadow's edge, Scout's demeanor changed. His ears perked forward, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Harold squinted through wire-rimmed glasses at the construction equipment that hadn't been there yesterday. Yellow bulldozers and cement mixers stood like alien invaders against the natural landscape. Scout barked sharply and pulled at his leash with unexpected strength, nearly yanking Harold off his feet. "Hold on, damn it," Harold called, but Scout had already broken free, racing towards something at the far side of the clearing. Cursing under his breath, words Martha would have scolded him for, Harold followed as quickly as his arthritic knees would allow. The freshly disturbed earth made walking difficult, and by the time he caught up, he was breathing heavily. "Scout, what in God's name?" The words died in his throat. There, in a newly poured concrete foundation, was Scout, trapped from the neck down and rapidly setting cement. Only his head and part of his shoulders remained above the gray surface, his eyes wide with panic as he whimpered and struggled. "No, no." Harold's voice cracked with desperation. He dropped to his knees beside the concrete form. "Help! Somebody help us!" His shouts echoed across the empty construction site. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks as he frantically tried to dig around Scout's neck with his bare hands, the concrete already stiffening and scraping his skin raw. "I'm here, boy. I'm right here," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I won't leave you." The distant sound of a truck engine gave Harold a surge of desperate hope. He turned toward the road and saw a white pickup approaching. "Help!" he screamed again, waving his arms wildly. "Please help us." The truck skidded to a stop, and a young woman in a denim jacket leaped out, medical bag in hand. "What happened?" she asked, dropping to her knees beside Harold. "I don't know," Harold sobbed. He ran ahead. "I found him like this. Please, you've got to help him. He's all I have left." The woman, Dr. Kayla Richards according to her name tag, assessed the situation with clinical efficiency. "We need to get him out before the concrete fully sets. I'm going to call for help." As she dialed her phone, Harold leaned close to Scout's ear. "You listen to me," he whispered fiercely. "You're not going anywhere. We made a promise to Martha, remember? We stay together." What Harold couldn't have known that morning was that Scout's rescue would be just the beginning. The first domino in a chain of events that would unearth secrets long buried in Oak Ridge's soil and force a man who'd spent decades in self-imposed isolation to stand at the center of a battle for the town's very soul. The sunlight filtering through the blinds of Oak Ridge Veterinary Clinic cast thin stripes across Scout's sedated form. Harold sat rigidly in a metal folding chair, his calloused hands clenched tightly together to hide their trembling. The chemical smell of antiseptic made his nose twitch, bringing back unwelcome memories of Martha's final days. Dr. Kayla Richards studied the X-rays illuminated on the wall, her copper-red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. At 32, she'd only been in Oak Ridge for 8 months, a city transplant who'd chosen small-town practice over lucrative urban opportunities. Most locals still considered her an outsider. "He's one lucky dog," she finally said, turning to face Harold. "No broken bones, remarkably, but there's significant tissue damage and trauma from the pressure and chemicals in the concrete. We've cleaned him up, but he'll need follow-up care for several weeks." Harold cleared his throat. "How much?" "Excuse me." "The bill," Harold clarified, his voice flat. "How much do I owe you?" Dr. Richards hesitated. "Mr. Dawson, this wasn't an accident. Someone deliberately put your dog in wet cement and left him to die. This is animal cruelty, possibly related to whatever's happening at that construction site. Have you called the sheriff?" Harold's jaw tightened. "Not your concern. It is when I have an animal assault victim in my clinic," she countered, crossing her arms. "Look, I know you don't know me, but that's right. I don't," Harold interrupted. "And I don't need charity or complications. Just tell me what I owe." Dr. Richards studied him for a long moment before her expression softened. "Nothing. Not yet anyway. This one's on the house." Harold stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "I don't take handouts." "It's not a handout," she replied evenly. "It's evidence preservation. If you go to the authorities, which you should, they'll need my documentation." A tense silence filled the room before Harold finally spoke. "Thompson Meadows been empty land since before I was born. Yesterday, equipment showed up. Today, my dog's nearly killed. Doesn't take a genius to connect those dots. Who owns the land? Used to be Town Commons. Hearing rumors some big development company bought it, though nobody seems to know when or how." Harold glanced at Scout, his expression momentarily vulnerable. "Can I take him home today?" Dr. Richards shook her head. "He needs overnight observation. You can come by first thing tomorrow." She hesitated before adding, "Mr. Dawson, I grew up watching my grandparents struggle to access health care in a rural community like this. That's why I'm here. Please let me help your dog without making it about pride." Something in her words seemed to penetrate Harold's armor. His shoulders sagged slightly. "Fine," he muttered, "but I'll work it off. Your clinic needs maintenance. That gutter's hanging by a thread, and those steps aren't up to code." "Deal," she replied, offering her hand. Harold reluctantly shook it, surprised by the strength in her grip. As Harold turned to leave, the clinic door burst open. Bernice Taylor swept in like a hurricane in a floral dress, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the humidity. "Harold Dawson, why am I hearing about Scout from Sally at the diner instead of from you?" The 70-year-old former schoolteacher had been Martha's closest friend and had appointed herself Harold's unofficial guardian since his wife's passing, a role he neither requested nor appreciated. "Because it's not your business, Bernie," Harold grumbled. Bernice ignored him, turning to Dr. Richards. "Is he going to be all right?" "The poor creature. With proper care, yes," Dr. Richards answered. "But Mr. Dawson should report this incident." "Report it?" Bernice's eyebrows shot up. "Sheriff Collins wouldn't investigate a bank robbery if it interrupted his fishing. No, we need Elizabeth's Garden Club on this." Harold groaned audibly. "Keep them out of it. Those biddies, as you call them, have more influence in this town than anyone," Bernice retorted. "Besides, Elizabeth's son works for the Arkansas Gazette. One call from her, and I said no." Harold's voice rose sharply, causing Scout to whimper in his sedated state. Harold immediately lowered his tone. "This is between me and whoever did this. I don't need the whole town involved." Dr. Richards stepped between them. "Scout needs rest. Why don't we continue this discussion tomorrow? Mr. Dawson, come by at 8. Outside the clinic, the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Harold's ancient Ford pickup sat alone in the parking lot, Martha's garden gloves still on the dashboard where she'd left them 3 years ago. "You can't handle this alone, Harold," Bernice said quietly beside him. "Whatever's happening at Thompson Meadow affects all of us. That land has history." Harold turned to her, his expression grave. "Some history should stay buried, Bernie. And some needs to see the light of day," she countered. "Martha would want you to fight for that land. You know she would." As Harold drove home along roads he'd known for 7 decades, he passed the edge of Thompson Meadow. Construction fencing now surrounded the perimeter, adorned with no trespassing signs bearing the logo of Pinnacle Development Group. A security guard sat in a black SUV by the makeshift entrance. Harold slowed his truck, studying the scene with narrowed eyes. In his rearview mirror, he noticed the guard speaking into a radio while staring directly at him. That night, as Harold ate dinner alone at his kitchen table, the empty dog bowl on the floor in accusatory presence, the phone rang. He rarely received calls and almost didn't answer. "Mr. Dawson," came an unfamiliar male voice when he finally picked up. "My name is James Whitaker, Chief Operations Officer with Pinnacle Development. I understand there was an unfortunate incident with your dog today. I wanted to personally express our regret and offer compensation for your troubles." Harold's grip tightened on the receiver. "How'd you get this number?" "Small towns," Whitaker replied smoothly. "Word travels. We'd like to make this right. Would you now?" Harold's voice was dangerously quiet. "Absolutely. In fact, we've been hoping to speak with you about your property as well. It adjoins our development area and would be a valuable addition. We're prepared to make a very generous offer." Harold's gaze drifted to the framed photo of Martha on the wall, standing proudly beside her herb garden. "You listen real careful, Mr. Whitaker. That meadow has been part of this town since before your daddy was born. Whatever paper you think gives you the right to destroy it isn't worth the ink it's printed on. And if you or any of your people come near me or my dog again, you'll find out just how stubborn an old man with nothing left to lose can be." He hung up before Whitaker could respond, his hand trembling with rage and fear he wouldn't admit even to himself. The morning broke with a heavy mist hanging over Oak Ridge, shrouding the distant Ozark foothills in ghostly white. Harold rose before dawn as usual, but the absence of Scout's familiar weight at the foot of his bed left an ache sharper than his arthritic joints. The house felt hollow without the click of dog nails on hardwood floors. By 7:30, Harold was already parked outside the veterinary clinic, 15 minutes before Dr. Richards was due to arrive. The truck's radio murmured softly, a local station reporting that Pinnacle Development Group had scheduled a town meeting next Tuesday to unveil plans for Oak Ridge Heights, a luxury residential community promising to bring Oak Ridge into the modern era. The sound of gravel crunching under tires pulled Harold's attention to the rearview mirror. Dr. Richards pulled up in her Subaru, looking surprised to find him waiting. She killed the engine and approached his window, 2 coffee cups balanced in her hands. "Figured you'd be early," she said, offering one to him. "Black, right? Martha always said you were too stubborn to put cream in perfectly good coffee." Harold's eyes narrowed. "You knew my wife?" "Not personally," Dr. Richards admitted. "But she's something of a legend among the older patients who come in with their pets. She knew more about natural remedies than most pharmacists, from what I hear." Harold accepted the coffee with reluctance. Martha studied plants her whole life. Not that anyone around here appreciated it while she was alive. Inside, Scout was awake, his tail thumping weakly against the blanket when he spotted Harold. The bandages around his torso were stark white against his tan and black fur. "He's doing remarkably well," Dr. Richards explained as Harold knelt beside the kennel. "Resilient old guy, just like his owner." Harold ignored the comment, focusing on Scout. "Hey, boy," he whispered, voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Ready to go home?" Dr. Richards handed Harold a paper bag containing medications and ointments. "Instructions are written down. He'll need the bandages changed daily. I can come by tomorrow to check on him if I can manage." Harold cut her off, carefully helping Scout to his feet. Dr. Richards sighed. "Mr. Dawson, there's something else. I found these embedded in Scout's fur." She held up a small evidence bag containing several crushed leaves and seeds. "They're not native to Arkansas as far as I can tell." Harold's expression froze as he recognized the distinctive serrated leaves. "Probably nothing," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. "Just weeds." "These aren't weeds," she insisted. "I studied botanical medicine during my residency. These look like—" The clinic door swung open, cutting off their conversation. Bernice swept in, followed by 5 women ranging in age from 60 to 80, all wearing matching gardening club vests embroidered with Oak Ridge green thumbs. "Harold," Bernice announced, "meet your army." Elizabeth Cooper, a former high school principal with iron gray hair and posture to match, stepped forward. "My son confirmed it, Harold. Pinnacle bought the Thompson Meadow from the county 3 months ago. The sale happened during a closed session of the county commissioners' meeting, no public notice, No comment period. Margaret Winters, whose husband had been Oakridge's mayor through the 1980s, clutched her handbag tightly. It's that no-good Commissioner Daniels. Always was slippery as an eel. Pinnacle's planning 50 luxury homes and a private golf course. Harold looked from one determined face to another. Ladies, I appreciate the concern, but nothing, interrupted Dorothea Sims, at 85 the oldest and most formidable member of the group. She taught Harold in 3rd grade and still spoke to him as if he were 8 years old. That land has been community property for generations. My grandmother used to gather herbs there for her remedies. Taught your Martha everything she knew, if you recall. Harold flushed at the mention of his wife's connection to the meadow. This isn't your fight. Like hell it isn't, Dorothea shot back, ignoring the scandalized looks from her companions. Harold Dawson, your dog was assaulted on property that rightfully belongs to this town. If you think this is just about you, you're even more hard-headed than Martha always said. Dr. Richards watched the exchange with growing curiosity. What exactly is on that land that makes it so valuable? Why target Mr. Dawson specifically? A heavy silence fell. The Garden Club members exchanged meaningful glances. Tell her, Harold, Bernice said quietly. She's already involved whether you like it or not. Harold's jaw worked silently, his internal struggle visible on his weathered face. Finally, he looked at Scout, then back at the circle of women who'd known him his entire life. Martha and I, he began hesitantly. We maintained a collection. Plants with medicinal properties. Most folks around here rely on home remedies. Can't afford regular doctor visits or overpriced prescriptions. Martha learned from her mother, who learned from hers. When pharmaceutical companies started patenting traditional plant compounds, Martha got worried the knowledge and the plants themselves might disappear. He paused, looking uncomfortable with revealing so much. We planted certain species in Thompson Meadow, created a sort of unofficial sanctuary for them. Been tending it for 40 years. More like a secret botanical garden, Elizabeth added. After insurance denied my Ronald's heart medication, Martha gave me foxglove tincture that kept him going another 5 years. Dr. Richards' eyes widened. You've been growing medicinal plants on public land? That's illegal? Harold challenged. Maybe, but necessary. Half the seniors in this town would be dead or bankrupt without those remedies. No, Dr. Richards shook her head. I was going to say remarkable. My grandparents relied on similar traditional medicines in their community. That knowledge is invaluable. Outside, a car door slammed. Through the window, they could see a black SUV parked beside Harold's truck. A man in an expensive suit emerged, speaking rapidly into a cell phone. That's James Whitaker, Harold growled, recognizing the man who had called him the previous night. Then it's time you introduced us, Bernice declared, straightening her gardening vest. Ladies, remember what we discussed. Before Harold could protest, the Garden Club had formed a protective semicircle around him and Scout, with Bernice at the center. When Whitaker entered, his confident smile faltered at the sight of the assembled group. Mr. Dawson, he began smoothly. I was hoping to continue our conversation from last night in person. His eyes fell on Scout's bandaged body, and he had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. Mr. Whitaker, Bernice interrupted, stepping forward with her hand extended. Bernice Taylor, president of the Oakridge Historical Society and secretary of the Garden Club. We understand you've acquired Thompson Meadow under questionable circumstances. There was nothing questionable about the transaction, Mrs. Taylor. Everything was completely legal, Whitaker replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. Legal and ethical aren't always the same thing, Dr. Richards observed quietly, crossing her arms. Whitaker's gaze hardened as he surveyed the room. I came to speak with Mr. Dawson privately about his property and to make amends for the unfortunate incident with his dog. But since we're all here, he opened his briefcase and extracted a stack of glossy brochures. Perhaps you'd like a preview of how Pinnacle Development will transform Oakridge for the better. Harold looked down at the marketing materials showing pristine homes with manicured lawns where wildflowers once grew. His hands tightened into fists at his sides as Whitaker continued his sales pitch. Progress is inevitable, ladies and gentlemen, Whitaker concluded smoothly. Oakridge can either embrace the future or be left behind. We hope you'll choose to be part of this exciting new chapter. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room until Scout, sensing his master's distress, let out a low, threatening growl from deep in his chest. The sound seemed to break the spell. "Some things," Harold said quietly, locking eyes with Whitaker, "are worth protecting from your kind of progress." The summer heat settled over Oak Ridge like a wool blanket, thick and suffocating. 2 weeks had passed since Scout's rescue, and the dog's recovery progressed faster than Dr. Richards had predicted. His bandages were gone now, leaving patches of fur still growing back over pink, healing skin. He stayed close to Harold's side, reluctant to venture far even in the safety of their fenced backyard. Harold sat on his back porch, surrounded by potted herbs in various stages of growth. His hands, spotted with age but still nimble, worked methodically to separate delicate seedlings into individual containers. Scout lay at his feet, amber eyes vigilant despite the lazy afternoon heat. "Mr. Dawson?" Dr. Richards called from around the side of the house. "It's Kayla. Just here for Scout's checkup." Harold sighed, setting aside a half-transplanted rosemary cutting. "Back here," he called. She appeared moments later, medical bag in hand, dressed casually in jeans and a lightweight blouse. Her eyes widened at the sight of the extensive container garden. "This is impressive," she remarked, kneeling to greet Scout, who offered a friendly lick to her hand. "You've got quite the green thumb." "Martha's thumb, not mine," Harold corrected, gesturing to a handwritten journal open beside him. "Just following her instructions. Still can't get the lavender to take right." Dr. Richards, Kayla, as she'd asked him to call her, examined the struggling plant. "Too much water, maybe? Lavender likes it dry." Harold grunted noncommittally. "How much do I owe you for these house calls?" "Your gutters aren't sagging anymore, and those porch steps are solid as a rock now," she replied with a smile. "I'd say we're even." As she examined Scout, Harold found himself studying her. There was something about the young veterinarian that reminded him of Martha, not in appearance, but in the careful, gentle way she handled animals, the respect she showed for his privacy while still pushing him when necessary. "So," she said, straightening up after checking Scout's healing wounds, "I've been doing some research on those plants I found in Scout's fur." Harold tensed. "That's so. MHM, Digitalis launata. Eastern European foxglove, not the common variety. Specifically cultivated for pharmaceutical digoxin production." She sat in the wicker chair opposite him, uninvited. "Not something that grows wild in Arkansas. Like I said, probably just blew in from somewhere," Harold muttered. "Then there's the ginseng variant I identified, one that's nearly extinct in the wild, and what appears to be a heritage variety of yarrow with unusually high azulene content." Kayla leaned forward. "Mr. Dawson, Harold, these aren't random plants. They're carefully selected medicinal species, some of which shouldn't even be growing in this climate." Harold stared at her for a long moment, then at Scout, who had settled his head on Kayla's foot with obvious affection. "You planning to report me to the DEA?" he finally asked. "For growing foxglove?" "No." She shook her head. "I'm asking because what you and Martha created might be incredibly valuable, scientifically and medically speaking." Harold's laugh was bitter. "Tell that to the pharmaceutical companies that sent cease and desist letters when Martha tried to publish her findings 20 years ago." Kayla's eyes widened. "She published research." "Tried to. Journal of Ethnopharmacology. They were interested until Merck threatened legal action claiming patent infringement." Harold's weathered face hardened at the memory. "Martha never got credit for her work. Said it didn't matter as long as people who needed help got it." Before Kayla could respond, the sound of car doors slamming came from the front of the house. Scout was on his feet instantly, a low growl building in his throat. "Harold," Bernice's voice called urgently. "You need to see this." They rounded the house to find Bernice, Elizabeth, and Margaret standing beside Elizabeth's sedan. Elizabeth's son Robert, a wiry man in his 40s with a press badge hanging around his neck, was with them. "They've started clearing the meadow," Robert said without preamble, handing Harold a digital camera. "Bulldozers showed up this morning." Harold's hands trembled slightly as he viewed the images on the small screen. Yellow machines tearing through the pristine meadow, trees already felled and stacked like fallen soldiers. "They can't do that," Kayla protested. "Don't they need environmental impact studies? Public hearings?" "Already done, apparently," Robert replied grimly. "County fast-tracked everything. My editor at the Gazette won't touch the story, says Pinnacle's ad money is too important to the paper." "But the town meeting isn't until Tuesday," Bernice said, her voice tight with anger. They promised the community a chance to weigh in. It's a dog and pony show, Harold muttered, handing back the camera. They never had any intention of listening. That's not all, Margaret added, her usually composed demeanor shaken. They've applied for permits to drill a well. A deep one. Harold's head snapped up. Where exactly? Northwestern corner of the property, according to the filing, Robert answered. Why? Instead of responding, Harold turned and walked briskly toward his truck. Everyone get in. Bring the dog, he called over his shoulder. 10 minutes later, they stood at the public access point to Cutter's Creek, a mile downstream from Thompson Meadow. Harold led them along a barely visible path until they reached a small clearing. A crude wooden bench faced the creek, which bubbled cheerfully over smooth stones. Martha loved this spot, Harold said softly. We'd come here at least once a week, rain or shine. Bernice nodded, tears in her eyes. I remember. She'd sketched the wildflowers while you pretended to fish, but really just dozed in the sun. Harold knelt with difficulty, his knees protesting, and beckoned to Scout. The dog approached, still moving carefully with his healing injuries. Find it, boy, Harold whispered. Like Martha taught you. Scout sniffed the ground tentatively, then with growing excitement. He moved in an expanding spiral pattern until suddenly he stopped, pawed at the earth, and whined. Good boy, Harold praised, joining the dog. He brushed away leaves and debris to reveal a small metal plate set into the ground, its surface green with age. Using his pocket knife, he carefully pried it open to expose a glass vial embedded in concrete. What is that? Kayla asked, crouching beside him. Water sample, part of Martha's monitoring system. Harold uncapped the vial and sniffed it, then held it to the light. Clear. No sulfur smell. Good flow rate. Monitoring system for what? Robert asked, journalist instincts clearly piqued. Harold recapped the vial and carefully replaced it. The Oak Ridge Aquifer, one of the largest untapped freshwater reserves in the state, feeds the springs that keep this creek flowing year-round, even in drought. Understanding dawned on Bernice's face. The development isn't about luxury homes at all. No, Harold confirmed grimly. It's about water rights. In 20 years, water will be more valuable than oil in these parts. Pinnacle knows it. And the well permit, Kayla began. Once they tap the aquifer, they control it, Harold finished. They can bottle it, sell it, divert it. Meanwhile, every spring, creek, and water table in the county starts to drop. Robert was frantically taking notes. How do you know all this? Because Martha spent 30 years documenting the aquifer's boundaries, flow rates, and connection to surface waters. Harold's voice cracked slightly. Nobody would listen to her. Just a housewife with amateur interest, they said. The Army Corps of Engineers dismissed her research without even reading it. Scout whined again, pawing at Harold's leg. The dog's ears were perked toward the path they'd come from, his body tense. Someone's coming, Kayla whispered. They retreated silently into the trees, just as two men in Pinnacle Development polo shirts emerged into the clearing, carrying surveying equipment. According to the GPS, the monitoring station should be right around here, the taller one said, consulting a tablet. Whitaker wants all of them found and removed before Tuesday's meeting, replied his companion. Can't have evidence of the widow Dawson's little science project complicating things. Harold's face went pale at the mention of Martha. Beside him, Bernice gripped his arm in warning, but it was Scout who betrayed their position. A growl escaped his throat, low and threatening. The surveyor's head snapped toward their hiding place. Who's there? The taller one called. As they stood frozen in the underbrush, Robert's phone suddenly rang, its cheerful melody shattering the tense silence. The surveyors started toward them, and in that moment, Harold made a decision that would irrevocably change the course of their fight. Run, he whispered to the others. Get back to the road. I'll distract them. Before anyone could protest, Harold stepped into the clearing, Scout at his side. Gentlemen, he said, his voice steadier than he felt, you're trespassing on public land. Mr. Dawson, the taller surveyor said, recovering quickly from his surprise. Fancy meeting you here. Harold recognized him as the security guard who had watched him from the SUV the day Scout was injured. The man's name badge read Miller. This is public access land, Harold replied evenly. My question is, what are you doing here with that equipment? Behind him, he could hear the others retreating through the woods. Good. Miller exchanged a glance with his partner. Just routine environmental assessment, sir. Nothing to concern yourself with. Funny, Harold commented, stepping closer to the creek. I thought I heard you mention my late wife. Martha Dawson had nothing to do with Pinnacle Development, so I'm wondering why your boss is so interested in her work. The second man, younger and clearly uncomfortable, shifted his weight. Look, mister, we're just following orders. Maybe you should take this up with Mr. Whitaker. Oh, I intend to, Harold assured him, Scout growling softly at his side. But first, I'd like to know how Pinnacle got its hands on Martha's research. Those monitoring stations weren't on any public record. Miller's expression hardened. Mr. Dawson, I suggest you head home and forget what you heard. Pinnacle Development is bringing prosperity to Oak Ridge. Don't make yourself an obstacle to progress. Is that a threat? Harold asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Just friendly advice, Miller replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We wouldn't want another unfortunate accident. Scout's growl deepened, the hair on his back standing up. So it was you, Harold said, the pieces falling into place. You tried to kill my dog. As a warning, Miller shrugged. Dogs wander. Construction sites are dangerous. Hard to prove anything either way. He took a step forward. Now, why don't you tell me where your friends went? We should all have a chat about privacy and corporate property. The tension was broken by the distant sound of a siren. Robert had reached help. Another time, gentlemen, Harold said, backing away with Scout still protectively at his side. I believe that's your cue to leave. By the time Sheriff Collins arrived, the surveyors were gone, leaving behind only trampled vegetation and tire tracks in the mud. Not much I can do, Harold, Collins said, scratching his balding head after hearing their account. At 53, Collins had been sheriff for almost 2 decades, more interested in maintaining peace than rocking boats. Trespassing's a stretch since it's public land, and threatening's just your word against theirs. They admitted their boss wants Martha's research destroyed, Harold insisted. Collins sighed. Look, I've known you since high school. I know you're not making this up, but Pinnacle's got the county commission in their pocket. My hands are tied unless they break an actual law I can charge them with. They buried my dog in cement. Harold's voice rose, causing several heads to turn in the small parking area where they'd gathered. And if you'd reported it properly when it happened, maybe I could have done something, Collins countered. But you've got no proof connecting these surveyors to that incident. Bernice stepped forward. Dave, you know what's really happening here. Martha documented that aquifer for decades. She tried to get the state to protect it. Bernice, water rights are way above my pay grade, Collins replied, lowering his voice. Between us, I don't like what Pinnacle's doing either, but legally they've done their homework. Unless you can prove they falsified environmental reports or bribed officials. What if we could? Robert interrupted, eyes bright with reporter's instinct. Collins looked uncomfortable. You'd need solid evidence. Hearsay won't cut it. He glanced at his watch. I've got to get back to the station. Harold, try to stay out of trouble, will you? For old time's sake. As the sheriff's cruiser pulled away, the small group stood in silence until Kayla spoke up. Harold, you mentioned Martha documented everything. Where are her records? The question hung in the air. Harold's gaze drifted to the distant hills. Some are at the house. The rest. He hesitated. The rest are hidden. Martha knew people would come for her research eventually. Then we need to find it all, Kayla said firmly. Before Tuesday's town meeting, the weekend passed in a flurry of activity. Harold's modest farmhouse became the unofficial headquarters for what Bernice had dubbed Operation Meadow. The garden club ladies arrived in shifts, bringing casseroles and determination in equal measure. Robert worked remotely, using his journalism contacts to dig into Pinnacle's history. Kayla split her time between the clinic and helping Harold organize Martha's meticulous notebooks. By Sunday evening, the dining room table had disappeared under maps, documents, and old photographs. Scout moved between visitors, accepting treats and gentle pats. His protective instincts seemingly extended to this growing circle of allies. Pinnacle's got a history, Robert announced, looking up from his laptop. 3 communities in Tennessee, 1 in Kentucky. Same pattern. They build luxury developments that never quite fill up, but meanwhile, they secure water rights and quietly start bottling operations within 5 years. Any opposition? Asked Elizabeth, peering over her reading glasses. Some, Robert confirmed. Environmental groups mostly. But they've got an army of lawyers, and they're careful to follow the letter of the law while violating its spirit. Harold stood before a large map of Oak Ridge County pinned to the wall, red markers indicating Martha's monitoring stations. "We're missing something," he muttered, more to himself than the others. Martha would have had a backup plan. She always did. "Harold," Bernice called softly from the hallway. "Can I speak with you privately?" He followed her into the kitchen, where she closed the door behind them. Bernice's usual commanding presence seemed dimmed, her shoulders uncharacteristically slumped. "What is it?" Harold asked, concern breaking through his gruff exterior. "I got a call today," she said, keeping her voice low. "From my nephew, Stephen. He's a lawyer in Little Rock." She paused, visibly struggling. "He works for Carson and Williams, the firm representing Pinnacle." Harold's expression hardened. "And he doesn't know I'm involved in this," Bernice continued. "He was just catching me up on his life, but he mentioned he's working on the Oak Ridge project. Said his firm did the title search on Thompson Meadow." She took a deep breath. "Harold, something's not right with the land transfer. Stephen said they had trouble establishing clear title, but his bosses pushed it through anyway." "That could be our angle," Harold said, mind racing. "If the sale wasn't legal, there's more," Bernice interrupted. "He said they found references to an old deed restriction that might have prevented development, but it was handled." Those were his words. "Handled?" Harold's eyes narrowed. "Meaning buried or destroyed?" "I think so," Bernice admitted, guilt written across her features. "I'm telling you because I can't ask him directly without revealing our opposition. And I'm not sure where his loyalties would lie." "Family's complicated," Harold said, surprising her with his understanding. "Martha always said blood ties can be the strongest bonds or the heaviest chains." A commotion from the dining room interrupted them. Caleb burst into the kitchen, eyes wide with excitement. "Harold, I think I found something." She held up a water-stained notebook, its pages yellow with age. It was tucked inside the lining of one of the other journals. "It's notes about plants that attract water, hydrophilic species. But look at this." She opened to a page where Martha had drawn what appeared to be a map using plant names instead of traditional labels. Along the bottom, in Martha's careful handwriting, was a note. "When all else fails, follow where Scout leads. Trust the dog's nose." Harold stared at the cryptic message, then at Scout, who was watching them with attentive eyes. "Son of a gun," he whispered. "She trained him." "Trained him to do what?" Bernice asked. "Find water," Harold replied, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "Martha always said animals sense things we can't. She was working with Scout since he was a pup, teaching him to detect underground springs. Said his ancestors were bred to find water in desert regions. That's why he ran to that specific spot at the construction site," Kayla realized. "And why he knew exactly where to find the monitoring station today." Harold nodded slowly. Martha must have hidden something important near a spring, something Scout could find. But Scout was just a puppy when Martha died, Bernice pointed out. "How would he remember?" "Smell," Kayla suggested. "If she used a distinctive scent marker, something that would last years." Harold's eyes lit with sudden understanding. "Her perfume," he said quietly. "French lavender. She only wore it on special occasions, but she'd put a drop on important documents, said it kept the insects away." He looked at Scout with newfound wonder. Even after 3 years, he'd recognize that scent anywhere. "So tomorrow," Bernice began. "Tomorrow," Harold confirmed, a plan taking shape. "We follow the dog." Monday dawned with a blanket of humidity that promised afternoon thunderstorms. Harold rose with the sun, his usual morning routine disrupted by a sense of urgency that had him checking the sky with uncharacteristic apprehension. If rain came before they found what Martha had hidden, their chances might wash away like footprints on a riverbank. Scout seemed to sense the importance of the day. He paced anxiously by the door, whining softly, his recently healed body tense with anticipation. "Not yet, boy," Harold murmured, filling the dog's water bowl. "We wait for the others." By 8 o'clock, the makeshift team had assembled on Harold's front porch. Kayla had closed her clinic for the day, citing emergency maintenance. Robert had called in sick to the newspaper. Bernice and Elizabeth arrived together, both dressed for hiking in practical pants and walking shoes that belied their age. Dorothea, despite her 85 years, insisted on joining them, leaning on a walking stick carved from hickory. "You sure about this?" Harold asked her, concern evident despite his gruff tone. Dorothea snorted. I was tagging along on Martha's expeditions when you were still too shy to ask her to dance at the spring social, Harold Dawson. I'm not missing this one. Harold surrendered with a nod, recognizing the same stubborn determination he saw in the mirror each morning. He pulled out Martha's water-stained notebook, opening it to the hand-drawn map. If I'm reading this right, he explained, pointing to the cryptic markings, Martha identified 7 major spring points connected to the aquifer. We checked 2 yesterday, nothing unusual. That leaves 5 possibilities. That's a lot of ground to cover before the storm hits, Robert observed, checking his weather app. Radar shows rain moving in by early afternoon. We won't need to check them all, Harold replied with quiet confidence. Martha would have chosen the most significant one. He turned to Scout, who sat attentively at his feet. And he'll know which one. From his pocket, Harold withdrew a faded blue handkerchief, carefully unfolding it to reveal a small glass vial. This was Martha's perfume, he explained, voice softening at the memory. Saved what was left after she passed. He stooped with difficulty to hold the open vial near Scout's nose. The dog inhaled deeply, tail beginning to wag as recognition sparked in his intelligent eyes. Harold capped the vial and tucked it safely away, then nodded to the others. Let's go. They set out in 2 vehicles, Harold's pickup and Bernice's sedan, toward the southwestern edge of town where Thompson Meadow bordered Cutter's Ridge. The land here rose gradually toward the foothills, thick with oak and hickory trees that offered welcome shade from the increasingly oppressive heat. Harold parked at the end of an old logging road, now overgrown with summer vegetation. From here, we walk, he announced, retrieving a backpack and a walking stick from the truck bed. Scout led the way, nose to the ground, but head lifting occasionally to test the air. The group followed in single file, conversation minimal as they conserved energy for the climb. Harold walked just behind Scout, one hand occasionally brushing the dog's back in reassurance. Behind him came Kayla, then Robert, with the 3 older women bringing up the rear at a slower but steady pace. They had been walking for nearly 40 minutes when Scout suddenly veered from the faint trail, heading westward through denser undergrowth. The change in direction led them down a gentle slope toward the sound of running water. Black Willow Creek. Harold identified the narrow stream they encountered. Underground most of the year, but surfaces here during the wet seasons. Scout paused at the creek's edge, seeming momentarily confused. He circled several times, sniffing intently, then looked back at Harold with a soft whine. The water's higher than usual, Kayla observed. Could the scent trail be submerged? Harold studied the creek bed, memories surfacing of countless walks with Martha in these woods. There's a rock formation upstream, he recalled. Martha called it Nature's Bridge, flat stones that cross the creek. Might be what Scout's looking for. Sure enough, 100 yards upstream, they found a series of massive flat rocks creating a natural crossing. Scout bounded across confidently, waiting on the other side with evident impatience. The terrain grew steeper as they continued, the forest gradually thinning. Conversation died altogether as they focused on navigating the increasingly challenging landscape. Even Dorothea, despite her earlier bravado, accepted Robert's supportive arm on the rougher sections. Nearly 2 hours into their journey, Scout stopped abruptly in a small clearing. A massive oak tree dominated the space, its sprawling branches creating a cathedral-like canopy overhead. The dog circled the tree several times, nose working frantically, then began to dig at a spot between 2 massive roots. This is it, Harold breathed, dropping to his knees beside Scout. His weathered hands joined the dog's efforts, scraping away years of accumulated leaves and soil. The others gathered around, watching with bated breath as Harold's digging revealed a metal edge. With growing excitement, he cleared more dirt away to expose what appeared to be an old ammunition box, the kind sold at Army surplus stores. It was secured with a rusted padlock. Anyone bring bolt cutters? Robert asked, examining the lock. Harold shook his head. Won't need them. He reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a small key attached to his house keyring. Martha made sure I always carried this. Said I'd know when to use it. The lock resisted at first, years of exposure having taken their toll. Harold worked it gently, whispering encouragements more to himself than the lock, until finally it surrendered with a click that seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed clearing. Inside the ammunition box, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed in plastic, was a leather portfolio and a smaller envelope addressed simply to Harold. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed seconds later by a low rumble of thunder. The promised storm was approaching. "We should head back," Bernice urged, eyeing the darkening sky. Harold nodded, carefully repacking the precious items in his backpack. "There's a hunter's cabin about half a mile east," he told them. "We can wait out the storm there." The cabin proved to be little more than a one-room shack with a tin roof and rough plank floors, but it was dry and secure. They arrived just as the first heavy drops began to fall, the sky now ominously dark despite the early afternoon hour. As rain drummed on the roof, Harold carefully unwrapped Martha's package on the cabin's small table. The others gathered close, flashlights providing illumination in the dim interior. Scout settled at Harold's feet, mission accomplished, his eyes heavy with well-earned fatigue. The leather portfolio contained a thick sheaf of documents, surveys, water quality reports, and handwritten observations spanning decades. But it was the legal documents beneath these that drew gasps from the group. "This is a deed," Robert said, examining one yellowed paper. "Dated 1879. It shows that Thompson Meadow was deeded to the town of Oak Ridge by the original landowner, Jeremiah Thompson, with the explicit condition that it remain undeveloped in perpetuity to preserve the natural springs and ensure water access for all citizens of the township." "A deed restriction," Bernice whispered, "just like Stephen mentioned. And here's the county's acceptance of the terms," Kayla pointed out, indicating official-looking signatures at the bottom of the document. "This makes the restriction legally binding." But how did Martha get the original deed? Elizabeth wondered. Harold had been silent, focused on the envelope addressed to him. With slightly trembling hands, he opened it and withdrew a single sheet of paper covered in Martha's familiar handwriting. As he read, the color drained from his face. "Harold," Bernice prompted gently. "What is it?" "It's from Martha," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She wrote this 3 days before she died." He cleared his throat and continued. "She says the deed came to her through her grandmother, Eleanor Thompson Jenkins." Understanding dawned in Bernice's eyes. Martha was a Thompson descendant? Harold nodded, still staring at the letter. "She never told me. Says here she was afraid it would complicate things if people knew she had a personal stake in the meadow's preservation." He looked up, meeting their startled gazes. "According to this, the land legally reverts to the Thompson heirs if the deed restriction is violated." "Which means," Robert began. "Which means," Harold finished quietly, "the meadow belongs to me now. Martha was the last direct Thompson descendant, and I'm her legal heir." The implications hung in the air as thunder crashed overhead. The sudden revelation transformed everything about their struggle. Harold was no longer just a concerned citizen. He was the rightful owner of the contested land. Pinnacle's entire purchase is invalid, Kayla realized. They bought property the county had no right to sell. "Only if we can prove the authenticity of these documents in time," Robert cautioned. "Tomorrow's town meeting is our last chance before the construction becomes too advanced to easily reverse." Harold carefully refolded Martha's letter. "There's more," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Martha wrote that her research wasn't just about protecting the springs. She found something in the aquifer, unique microbial communities with potential pharmaceutical applications. She was in talks with researchers at the university when she got sick." He looked down at Scout, who gazed back with unwavering loyalty. "She trained Scout as a puppy to find specific water sources where these microbes thrived. That's why he ran to that exact spot at the construction site. And why Pinnacle is so determined to start drilling," Bernice concluded. "They must have gotten hold of some portion of her research." "But how?" Elizabeth asked. Harold's expression darkened. "Martha mentions that too. Says she suspects someone at the university leaked her findings to pharmaceutical interests." He carefully gathered the documents, securing them in his backpack. "We need to get these to safety and figure out our next move before tomorrow's meeting." The rain had intensified, beating a relentless rhythm on the tin roof. Through the cabin's single window, they could see sheets of water cascading down, turning the forest floor into muddy streams. "We might be here a while," Robert observed, checking his phone. No signal either. As if in response, a blinding flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by an ear-splitting crack of thunder. The lights of their flashlights flickered and died as the storm's fury enveloped the small cabin, leaving them isolated and cut off, but armed with the truth that could save Thompson Meadow. The storm raged with unexpected ferocity, trapping them in the cabin as afternoon stretched into evening. Rain hammered the tin roof with such intensity that conversation became difficult, forcing them into periods of contemplative silence broken only by the occasional crash of thunder. Harold sat on a rough-hewn bench, Martha's documents spread carefully before him on the table, protected from the occasional roof leaks by Robert's rain jacket. His weathered fingers traced her handwriting with reverence, as if through touch alone he might absorb the wisdom she'd left behind. Scout dozed fitfully at his feet, occasionally startling awake at particularly loud thunderclaps. The dog's protective instincts remained evident even in rest, his body positioned between Harold and the cabin door. She knew, Harold murmured, more to himself than the others. All these years, she knew who she was and what the land meant, but she never said a word. Bernice, who had been watching him with concern, moved to sit beside him. Martha always played her cards close, she said gently. Remember how she surprised everyone with that blue ribbon at the state fair? Hadn't told a soul she was entering her herbal remedies. Harold nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. 3 months she spent perfecting that arthritis salve. Tested it on me every night. Did it work? Kayla asked, drawn into the conversation from where she'd been studying water survey maps with Robert. Like magic, Harold confirmed. Got the recipe somewhere at home still. That's what we should be documenting, Kayla said suddenly, straightening. Not just the legal ownership of the land, but the scientific value of what Martha discovered. Robert looked up from the maps. Pharmaceutical applications would certainly add weight to our case. If these microbes are unique to this aquifer, they are, Harold interrupted with certainty. Martha confirmed it with tests. That's why she was so secretive toward the end. Said some things are too important to patent, too valuable to control. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the cabin's single window, momentarily drowning out all other sounds. When it subsided, Dorothea spoke from where she sat near the small wood stove, her voice carrying the weight of her years. I remember the day Martha came to me. Must have been nearly 30 years ago now. Asked me about the old stories, the ones my grandmother told about the healing waters of Oakridge. Back then, folks would travel for days to drink from certain springs. Claimed it cured everything from gout to grief. The elderly woman's eyes grew distant with memory. Martha listened like it was gospel, not superstition. She'd bring me samples, ask which tasted like the stories. I thought she was humoring an old woman. Now I wonder. She was mapping the aquifer through oral history, Kayla realized. Combining traditional knowledge with scientific method. Harold nodded slowly. That's Martha. Always said science without humanity is just numbers on a page. Elizabeth, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. We need to be careful how we present this tomorrow. Pinnacle will have lawyers, experts, and the county commission in their pocket. If we come across as sentimental preservationists or conspiracy theorists, Robert added grimly, they'll dismiss us out of hand, Elizabeth finished. We need to approach this strategically. The cabin fell silent save for the storm's diminishing fury. The gravity of tomorrow's confrontation weighed heavily on each of them. Finally, Harold straightened, decision evident in his posture. Martha spent her life protecting this knowledge in secret. Tomorrow, we bring everything into the light. He surveyed the unlikely allies gathered around him, a young veterinarian, a journalist, and 3 elderly women with steel in their spines. But we'll need to split up at first light. There's more evidence to gather before the meeting. Dawn broke with unexpected clarity, the storm having scrubbed the air clean and left behind a brilliant blue sky. The forest dripped with lingering moisture, but the dirt roads would be navigable by mid-morning. True to Harold's prediction, they parted ways as soon as travel became possible. Bernice and Elizabeth headed to the county courthouse to verify the deed's proper filing. Dorothea returned to town to rally additional support among the senior community. Robert drove to the university in Fayetteville, armed with copies of Martha's research, seeking expert validation. Harold, Kayla, and Scout took a different path, heading directly to Thompson Meadow. They needed photographic evidence of the construction's impact on the protected springs before Pinnacle could further disrupt the site. They parked a quarter-mile from the meadow's edge, approaching on foot through the woods to avoid the main entrance where security would certainly be stationed. Scout led the way, moving with purpose despite his still-healing injuries. "How much time do we have?" Kayla whispered as they crouched at the tree line, surveying the meadow beyond. Harold checked his watch. "Town meeting's at 7. It's just past noon now." The construction site was eerily quiet, the heavy equipment idle in the aftermath of the storm. A single security vehicle was visible near the temporary office trailer, but no workers were in sight. "Sunday skeleton crew," Harold murmured, probably waiting for the ground to dry before bringing in the heavy machinery. Kayla readied her camera. "Where do we need to go?" "Northwestern section," Harold replied, pointing toward a distant corner of the property. "That's where they're planning to drill. It's also where Scout found the microbridge spring." They moved carefully along the perimeter, using the trees for cover. Scout stayed close, alert to potential threats. As they neared the northwestern corner, the sound of voices drifted toward them. Harold raised a hand, signaling for silence. Peering through the underbrush, they could make out 3 figures standing near a partially excavated area. One was unmistakably James Whitaker, his expensive suit incongruous against the muddy backdrop. With him was Miller, the security guard who had threatened Harold at Cutter's Creek. The third man, older and distinguished-looking in a lab coat, was unfamiliar. "Need to accelerate the timeline," Whitaker was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Local opposition is organizing faster than anticipated. The samples require proper handling," the older man replied, his tone professionally detached. "Rush this process, and you risk contaminating what could be a billion-dollar discovery. Dr. Ramirez, you assured us you could extract and culture these microbes efficiently," Whitaker responded sharply. "Pinnacle didn't invest millions based on speculation." The name struck Harold like a physical blow. "Ramirez," he whispered. He was Martha's contact at the university. The one she suspected leaked her research. Kayla squeezed his arm in warning as Scout tensed beside them, a low growl building in his throat. "The old man found the deed," Miller reported, lighting a cigarette. "Cabin up on the ridge. Got caught in the storm, or they'd have been back already." Whitaker cursed softly. "How reliable is your source?" "Works for Taylor's nephew at the law firm. Overheard a phone call this morning." Harold and Kayla exchanged alarmed glances. Bernice's nephew had been compromised, or worse, was actively working against them. "The deed complicates things legally," Whitaker acknowledged, "but doesn't change our operational timeline. Once we've secured and extracted the microbial samples, the land dispute becomes a minor inconvenience. Reynolds Pharmaceuticals is prepared to pay 9 figures for exclusive rights." "And my compensation?" Dr. Ramirez inquired. "As agreed, 5% of the licensing deal and proper academic attribution." Whitaker checked his watch. "We need visible progress before tonight's meeting. Get your team in here as soon as the ground firms up. I want extraction underway by tomorrow morning, regardless of the town's decision." As the men moved toward the trailer, Kayla raised her camera, capturing their images and recording their conversation with the video function. Harold remained frozen, processing the implications of what they'd heard. "They're after the microbes," he said finally, voice barely audible. "The development is just cover for bioprospecting. And they're planning to ignore the town meeting entirely," Kayla added, reviewing the footage to ensure it was clear. They retreated carefully to a safer distance before continuing their documentation of the site. Kayla photographed the disturbed springs, the equipment positioned over critical water sources, and the areas already cleared of the rare medicinal plants Martha had cultivated. As they worked their way around the property, Scout suddenly stiffened, nose twitching. Before Harold could grab his collar, the dog darted forward into a recently cleared area, pawing urgently at the disturbed earth. "Scout, get back here," Harold hissed, but the dog continued digging with single-minded determination. Left with no choice, Harold and Kayla hurried to join him, keeping low to avoid being spotted from the trailer. By the time they reached Scout, he had uncovered something metallic and cylindrical. Another sample container, Harold realized, carefully extracting the object from the mud. Unlike the simple monitoring stations they'd found earlier, this was a sophisticated collection device, sealed and labeled with Martha's distinctive handwriting. "Primary culture, Spring 7. Do not disturb." She created a backup, Kayla whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. Insurance against exactly what's happening now. Harold nodded, cradling the container reverently. Martha never left anything to chance. He secured the precious sample in his pack, then patted Scout's head. Good boy. Let's get what we came for and get out. They completed their circuit of the property, documenting every violation of environmental protocols and every instance where construction directly threatened the protected springs. As they prepared to leave, a movement near the main entrance caught their attention. A convoy of vehicles was arriving, not construction equipment, but sleek town cars and SUVs with tinted windows. Men and women in business attire emerged, being greeted by Whitaker with professional cordiality. Investors, Kayla guessed, zooming in with her camera, coming to see what they're buying. Harold's expression hardened as he recognized one of the visitors. That's Commissioner Daniels with them, the one who pushed through the land sale. We need to go, Kayla urged. We've got what we need, and the town meeting is still hours away, Harold finished grimly. And they're moving faster than we anticipated. He studied the scene for a long moment, internal conflict visible on his weathered face. Finally, he turned to Kayla. Decision made. Get back to town with the evidence. Find Bernice and the others. I'll meet you at the town hall. Alarm flashed across Kayla's features. What are you going to do? Harold's gaze returned to the gathering by the trailer, determination hardening his blue eyes. Something Martha would have done. Something I should have done years ago. He patted Scout's head. Take him with you. He'll keep you safe. Harold, go, Kayla, he insisted quietly. Some battles an old man has to fight alone. As Kayla reluctantly retreated with Scout, Harold Dawson straightened his shoulders and began walking purposefully toward the gathering of investors. Martha's truth finally ready to be spoken aloud after decades of silence. Kayla Richards had never considered herself particularly athletic, but fear and urgency lent speed to her steps as she navigated the muddy forest path with Scout leading the way. The German Shepherd seemed to understand the gravity of their mission, pausing occasionally to ensure she kept pace but never straying far ahead. The evidence secured in her backpack felt impossibly heavy, not from physical weight, but from responsibility. Martha's biological samples, the photographic evidence, the recorded conversation, all of it represented years of careful work and Harold's last hope for saving Thompson Meadow. But Harold himself had remained behind, and that thought propelled Kayla forward even as her lungs burned with exertion. What is that stubborn old man thinking? She muttered between breaths. Scout glanced back at her, amber eyes seeming to reflect her concern. When they finally reached her car, Kayla's hands shook so badly she struggled to find the right key. The moment they were inside, she pulled out her phone and dialed Bernice's number, drumming her fingers anxiously on the steering wheel as it rang. Bernice Taylor speaking, came the clipped answer. It's Kayla. We've got problems, she said, starting the engine and pulling onto the narrow dirt road. Harold stayed behind at the meadow. Pinnacle's moving faster than we thought. They've got investors on site right now, including Commissioner Daniels. There was a pause before Bernice responded, her voice tight with controlled alarm. Where are you now? Heading back to town. I've got Scout and all the evidence we collected. Kayla swerved to avoid a fallen branch. But Harold, I'm worried about what he's planning. That man, Bernice sighed, exasperation barely masking fear. Listen carefully. Elizabeth and I found something at the courthouse. The original Thompson deed was indeed on file, but there's also a more recent document, dated just 3 months ago, that purports to extinguish the deed restrictions. It has what appears to be Martha's signature on it. That's impossible, Kayla protested. Martha's been gone 3 years. Exactly. It's a forgery, and not even a particularly good one. But it was enough for the county commission to justify the sale. Bernice's voice hardened. Commissioner Daniels pushed it through a closed session. We need to get this information to Harold before he does something reckless. Too late for that, Kayla replied grimly. Meet me at his house in 20 minutes. And call Robert. We need to know what he found at the university. When Kayla arrived at Harold's modest farmhouse, Bernice's sedan was already parked in the gravel driveway alongside Elizabeth's car. Inside, she found the garden club members gathered in the kitchen, faces taut with concern. Any word from him? Kayla asked, letting Scout off his leash. Bernice shook her head. His phone's going straight to voicemail. Robert called. Elizabeth added. He found a professor at the university who remembers Martha's work. Apparently, She was onto something revolutionary. Microbes that produce novel antibiotic compounds, effective against resistant strains. The professor was shocked to learn her research had been buried and is on his way here now with documentation supporting its significance. That matches what we overheard, Kayla confirmed, pulling out her camera to show them the recorded conversation. Pinnacle's partnering with Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. They're after the microbes, not the land itself. As they watched the damning video, Dorothea spoke up from where she sat at the kitchen table, her fingers idly stroking Scout's head. Back in my day, we'd call that claim jumping. Pure and simple. These days they call it corporate espionage, Bernice corrected grimly. And it's still illegal. The sound of tires on gravel drew their attention. Through the window, they saw Robert's car pulling up, followed by a university vehicle. Moments later, Robert rushed in, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. This is Professor Alan Mitchell, Robert introduced quickly. He worked with Martha on cataloging indigenous medicinal plants 20 years ago. He's brought university records that verify her work. Professor Mitchell nodded solemnly. Mrs. Dawson was decades ahead of her time in recognizing the potential of these microbiological communities. When she stopped communicating with the department, we assumed she'd abandoned the research. His expression clouded. Now I understand she may have had good reason to be cautious. Did you know Dr. Ramirez? Kayla asked sharply. The professor's surprise was evident. Eduardo Ramirez. He was a junior faculty member when Martha was collaborating with us. Ambitious young man, but I didn't realize he was aware of her work. He's working with Pinnacle now, Kayla explained, showing him the video. Appears to have been tracking Martha's research without her knowledge. Professor Mitchell's face darkened as he watched. This is deeply troubling. Scientific theft aside, exploiting these microbes without proper environmental safeguards could irreparably damage the aquifer. That's what Martha feared, Bernice confirmed. It's why she kept so much secret, even from Harold. The group fell silent as the magnitude of the situation settled over them. The town meeting was less than 3 hours away, and Harold was still unaccounted for. We need a plan, Elizabeth finally stated, her principal's authority asserting itself. Assuming Harold makes it back in time, how do we present this evidence most effectively? I can speak to the scientific significance, Professor Mitchell offered. And I can validate the legal ownership issues, Bernice added. The forged document gives us grounds for immediate injunction, Robert contributed. I've already contacted a lawyer friend in Little Rock who specializes in land disputes. Kayla found herself staring at the map of Thompson Meadows still pinned to Harold's wall. Red markers indicated Martha's monitoring stations. Blue circles showed the locations of rare plant specimens. In the northwestern corner, where they had encountered Whitaker and Ramirez, Martha had drawn a small star labeled simply, Heart. We're still missing something, Kayla murmured, moving closer to the map. Harold called the microbe container we found a backup. That suggests there's a primary repository somewhere. Scout, who had been resting by Dorothea's chair, suddenly stood at attention, ears perked toward the front of the house. A moment later, they heard the distinct rumble of Harold's old pickup truck. Bernice was first to the door, pulling it open before Harold could reach for the handle. The old man who stood on the porch was nearly unrecognizable, not physically, but in bearing. Gone was the defensive hunch of his shoulders, the guarded wariness in his eyes. Despite mud-spattered clothes and obvious exhaustion, Harold Dawson stood tall, a quiet fire burning behind his steel-blue gaze. You look like you've been to war, Bernice observed, ushering him inside. In a manner of speaking, Harold replied, his voice raspy. He nodded acknowledgement to the gathered group, pausing at the sight of Professor Mitchell. University finally taking an interest after all these years. I owe your wife an apology, Mr. Dawson, the professor replied solemnly. We should have protected her work better. Harold accepted this with a short nod before turning to address them all. I confronted Whitaker and his investors. Told them I knew about the forged document, the real reason they want the land, all of it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Should have seen their faces when I mentioned I'm the legal heir to Thompson property. Harold, that was dangerous, Kayla admonished, though admiration colored her tone. Maybe so, he conceded, but necessary. Daniels nearly swallowed his tie when I mentioned possible charges for falsifying Martha's signature. Harold moved to the kitchen table, retrieving a bottle of water from the refrigerator. They're scared now. Offering a compromise, they'll preserve part of the meadow as a green space within their development. That's not enough, Bernice declared. No, it's not, Harold agreed, surprising them. Before his confrontation with Pinnacle, they had expected to fight him on any compromise. That land belongs to the town, as Jeremiah Thompson intended. And what lives in those springs belongs to everyone, not some pharmaceutical company's shareholders. The town meeting starts in 2 hours, Elizabeth reminded them. We should coordinate our presentation. Before we do, Harold said, his tone shifting, there's somewhere we need to go. Something Martha wanted me to find. He glanced at the wall map, focusing on the starred location. The heart of it all. The sun hung low on the horizon as 2 vehicles bumped along the overgrown track leading to what locals had always called Widow's Peak, a small rise overlooking Thompson Meadow from the eastern edge. Scout sat in the truck's passenger seat beside Harold, while Kayla, Robert, and Professor Mitchell followed in Robert's car. Bernice, Elizabeth, and Dorothea had remained behind to organize the growing number of supporters gathering at the town hall. As they crested the final rise, Harold cut the engine and sat for a moment, staring at the humble stone structure before them. Little more than a garden shed, its weathered walls were almost completely overtaken by climbing roses, now in full summer bloom. I helped her build this, Harold said as the others joined him. Thought it was just a place for her to escape and read. Never knew what she really used it for. The small iron key turned smoothly in the lock despite years of disuse. Inside, dust motes danced in the slanting sunlight that pierced the single window. What had appeared modest from outside revealed itself as surprisingly substantial within, a small but complete laboratory. Glass containers lined wooden shelves, each meticulously labeled in Martha's handwriting. A microscope sat on a small table beside a logbook bound in green leather. In the corner, a small refrigeration unit hummed softly, still operational after all this time. Solar-powered, Harold explained, noticing their surprise. Martha was always ahead of her time. Professor Mitchell approached the shelves with reverent care. These are culture samples, he breathed, examining the labels. Cataloged and preserved with remarkable precision. Look at this, Robert called from where he had opened the logbook. Correspondence with researchers around the world, Norway, Japan, Brazil. She was creating an international network of independent scientists. This is her legacy, Harold said quietly. Not just protecting a piece of land, but preserving knowledge that belongs to everyone. He moved to the refrigeration unit and opened it, retrieving a flash drive sealed in a protective case. She left instructions in her letter. Everything is here, her complete research, methodologies, results, ready to be shared with the world if the land was ever threatened. As they carefully gathered the most critical evidence to present at the town meeting, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. From the doorway of the small laboratory, they could see Thompson Meadow spread out below, the jarring wound of early construction visible even at this distance. Do you think it's enough? Kayla asked softly, standing beside Harold as the others loaded samples into Robert's car. To stop them, Harold's weathered face was illuminated by the last golden rays of sunlight, bringing every line of character into sharp relief. Martha always said truth is like water. It finds a way through even the smallest cracks. He turned to meet Kayla's gaze directly. For 30 years, I kept my promise to never be a burden to anyone. Thought that meant facing everything alone. A depth of emotion roughened his voice. I was wrong. Tonight, we stand together. The distant town church bell rang 7 times, its sound carrying clearly in the evening air. The meeting was beginning, and with it, the final battle for Thompson Meadows' soul. Oak Ridge Town Hall had never seen such a crowd. The modest municipal building, with its 1950s brick facade and limited parking, typically hosted sparsely attended meetings where the same dozen civic-minded citizens discussed mundane matters of small-town governance. Tonight, cars lined both sides of Main Street for 3 blocks, and every seat in the wood-paneled meeting room was filled. People stood along the walls, sat cross-legged in the aisles, and crowded the doorway, straining to hear. Harold paused at the entrance, momentarily overwhelmed by the sea of familiar faces turned expectantly in his direction. For a man who had cultivated solitude for decades, the sudden attention was almost physically painful. Scout pressed reassuringly against his leg, a steady presence amid the chaos. Quite the turnout, Bernice whispered beside him. Elizabeth's been working her phone tree all afternoon. Indeed, the garden club had mobilized forces Harold hadn't anticipated. The senior community had shown up in full force, many displaying handmade signs with slogans like Save Our Springs and Thompson Meadow, not for sale. But there were younger faces too, parents with school-aged children, local business owners, farmers from outlying properties. The crowd represented every facet of Oak Ridge society. Near the front, James Whitaker sat with his team of suits, their polished appearance contrasting sharply with the casual dress of most attendees. Commissioner Daniels occupied his usual seat on the raised platform, visibly uncomfortable as he shuffled papers and avoided eye contact with the audience. Mayor Patricia Wilson, a pragmatic woman in her 50s who had managed Oak Ridge's limited affairs for 3 terms, called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of her gavel. Due to the extraordinary interest in tonight's agenda, she began, voice amplified by the outdated microphone system, we'll be adjusting our usual format. The topic of Pinnacle Development's project has clearly captured community attention, so we'll address it first and allocate extended time for public comment. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. First, we'll hear from Pinnacle Development representatives about their proposed Oak Ridge Heights community. Then we'll open the floor to community feedback. Please keep comments respectful and concise. She nodded toward Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker, you have 10 minutes. Whitaker approached the podium with practiced confidence, his smile calculated to project both authority and approachability. Behind him, an assistant set up a portable screen for a digital presentation. Thank you, Mayor Wilson, Commissioner Daniels, citizens of Oak Ridge, he began smoothly. I appreciate this opportunity to share our vision for the future of your beautiful community. The presentation that followed was slick and persuasive. Architectural renderings of tasteful homes nestled among preserved trees, recreation areas with walking trails, a small commercial district promising jobs and convenience, all designed to enhance Oak Ridge's natural beauty while bringing necessary economic development. We understand change can be concerning, Whitaker concluded as his allotted time neared its end. But Pinnacle Development has a proven track record of responsible community-integrated projects. The Thompson Meadow property, which has been legally acquired through proper channels, represents an opportunity for Oak Ridge to thrive in changing times. As Whitaker returned to his seat, Harold noted the mixed reactions among the audience, some nodding in agreement at the promise of jobs and increased property values, others frowning skeptically. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker, Mayor Wilson said. We'll now open the floor for public comment. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. She glanced down at the sign-up sheet. First, we have Harold Dawson. A hush fell over the room as Harold made his way slowly to the podium, Scout at his heels. He placed Martha's leather portfolio on the small wooden surface, along with the documents they had gathered that afternoon. For a moment, he simply stood there, looking out at the sea of expectant faces. Neighbors he had avoided for years, community events he had skipped, connections he had allowed to wither after Martha's death. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady, forcing the crowd to lean forward to catch his words. Most of you know me, he began. Some of you think you know me, the stubborn old man who keeps to himself on the edge of town. For 3 years since Martha passed, that's exactly what I've been. But before that, I was something else. We were something else. Harold opened the portfolio, though he didn't need to reference its contents. My wife, Martha Dawson, spent her life studying the land we call Thompson Meadow, not for profit or recognition, but because she understood something most of us have forgotten. That land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. He looked up, making eye contact with various people in the audience. Thompson Meadow isn't just empty space waiting to be developed. It's a living system that provides clean water to every creek, well, and spring in this county. The aquifer beneath it is one of the last untainted water sources in the state. Harold pulled out the original deed, holding it up for all to see. In 1879, Jeremiah Thompson deeded this land to the town of Oak Ridge with a specific condition, that it remain undeveloped forever to protect the water that gives this town life. That deed was never legally invalidated. Commissioner Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Harold continued. Some of you might wonder why this matters to me personally. Here, Harold paused, gathering himself for a revelation he had only recently accepted. Martha was born Eleanor Martha Thompson Jenkins. She was Jeremiah Thompson's great-granddaughter and the last direct descendant of the family. As her husband and legal heir, I now hold title to that land if the deed restrictions are violated, which they have been, through deception and forgery. Gasps and murmurs swept through the crowd. Commissioner Daniels half rose from his seat, face flushed, but Mayor Wilson silenced him with a sharp look. But this isn't about ownership, Harold continued. It's about stewardship. Martha discovered something in the springs of Thompson Meadow, microscopic life forms with remarkable properties. Professor Mitchell from the State University can explain the science better than I can, but the simple truth is this. What lives in those waters could help countless people suffering from antibiotic-resistant infections. He gestured toward where Whitaker sat, now rigid with tension. Pinnacle Development knows this. They're not here to build homes for your children or create jobs for your community. They're here to extract and exploit a resource that should benefit everyone, not just shareholders of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. At this accusation, Whitaker stood abruptly. This is slander. We have no connection to, we have recorded evidence proving otherwise, Robert interjected from the audience, holding up his phone. And witnesses to your conversation with Dr. Ramirez this afternoon. Mayor Wilson banged her gavel. Mr. Whitaker, you'll have an opportunity to respond. Please allow Mr. Dawson to finish. Harold nodded his thanks. For decades, Martha and I quietly tended the meadow, preserving plants with medicinal properties, monitoring the springs, keeping records. His voice softened with emotion. Many of you benefited from her knowledge. The salves for arthritis, tinctures for heart conditions, remedies for ailments when prescription costs were too high. Nods of recognition rippled through the older members of the audience. I've lived by a promise I made to Martha, to never be a burden to anyone. I thought that meant standing alone, staying quiet, letting others decide the fate of what she protected. Harold's voice strengthened. I was wrong. Sometimes the heaviest burden is the truth left unspoken. He gestured toward Kayla, who approached with the evidence they had collected. Dr. Richards can verify the environmental impact of the construction already underway. Robert Cooper has documentation of the forged approval process. Professor Mitchell can confirm the scientific significance of Martha's discoveries. Harold turned to face the town commissioners directly. Pinnacle's purchase of Thompson Meadow was based on fraudulent documents. Their true intent was concealed from this community. Their actions have already damaged protected water sources and endangered public health. He placed both hands flat on the podium, leaning forward slightly. I'm asking this council to invalidate the sale immediately and place an injunction on all construction activities while legal ownership is determined. The room erupted in applause and shouts of support. Mayor Wilson struggled to restore order, banging her gavel repeatedly. When the noise finally subsided, Whitaker strode to the front, demanding time to respond. His corporate composure had fractured, revealing the calculation beneath. These are baseless accusations from a grieving widower who can't accept progress, he began, his tone dismissive. The Thompson deed restriction expired decades ago under state law. The county commission approved our purchase following all legal requirements. Mr. Dawson's claim to ownership is tenuous at best and would require years of litigation to establish. Whitaker turned to address the audience directly. Meanwhile, Oak Ridge will lose the economic opportunity of a generation. The jobs, the tax revenue, the property value increases, all gone because of unsubstantiated conspiracy theories about pharmaceutical research. He gestured toward the digital renderings still displayed on the screen. We've already invested millions in this project. We've hired local contractors. We're prepared to offer additional concessions, a larger preserved green space, dedicated public access to certain trail areas. But we cannot and will not abandon a legally acquired development based on sentimental attachments to undeveloped land. Commissioner Daniels nodded vigorously, finally finding his voice. The county stands by its decision. The sale was properly executed according to our legal counsel. A tense silence fell over the room as the battle lines were clearly drawn. Harold felt a momentary wavering of confidence. Whitaker was right about one thing. Legal battles could take years, during which the meadow would remain vulnerable. It was Dorothea Sims who broke the impasse, rising slowly from her seat in the front row, her 85 years somehow adding authority rather than diminishing it. "I taught most of you in this room," she began, her voice carrying surprisingly well without amplification. "Taught your parents too, in many cases. In my 50 years of education, I emphasized one principle above all others: integrity." She turned slightly to face Whitaker. "Young man, I don't know what they teach in business school these days, but where I come from, forgery is still a crime." Shifting her gaze to Commissioner Daniels, she continued, "And public officials who participate in fraud can still face prosecution." Dorothea reached into her handbag and withdrew a sheaf of papers. "I've spent the afternoon on the phone with my nephew at the State Attorney General's office. These are preliminary injunction papers ready for filing first thing tomorrow morning, along with criminal complaints against all parties involved in falsifying Martha Dawson's signature. The AG's office is quite interested in this case." The revelation landed like a thunderclap in the crowded room. Commissioner Daniels visibly paled. Mayor Wilson, surveying the now restless crowd, made a quick decision. "I believe we have sufficient information to consider action on this matter immediately, rather than tabling it for a future meeting." She looked to her fellow council members. "I'll entertain a motion regarding the Thompson Meadow property." Elizabeth Cooper's husband, who had served on the town council for 15 years, stood. "I move that we formally challenge the county's sale of Thompson Meadow to Pinnacle Development on the grounds of deed restriction violation and possible fraudulent documentation, and that we issue an immediate stop work order until legal ownership is determined." "Second," called another council member. Mayor Wilson nodded. "We have a motion and second. Is there discussion?" For the next 30 minutes, council members debated the motion while the crowd listened intently. The legal complexities, the economic implications, the environmental concerns, all were weighed against the evidence Harold and his allies had presented. Finally, Mayor Wilson called for a vote. One by one, the 7 council members cast their votes, 5 in favor, 2 abstaining, none opposed. "Motion carries," Mayor Wilson announced. "A stop work order will be issued immediately. The town attorney will file appropriate legal challenges to the sale first thing tomorrow." She fixed Whitaker with a stern gaze. "Pinnacle Development is hereby notified that any continued construction activity will constitute criminal trespass." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Harold stood motionless at the front of the room, overwhelmed by the sudden triumph. Scout pressed against his leg, grounding him in the moment. As the formal meeting dissolved into excited conversation, Whitaker approached Harold, his expression tightly controlled. "This isn't over, Mr. Dawson," he said quietly. "Pinnacle has the resources for extended litigation. You're an old man with limited means. Think carefully about what you're committing to." Harold met his gaze steadily. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Whitaker. I am an old man, which means I don't have time for long fights." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Fortunately, I'm not fighting alone anymore." As if to emphasize his point, Kayla stepped to Harold's side, followed by Bernice, Professor Mitchell, and Robert. Behind them, dozens of townspeople gathered in a show of solidarity. Whitaker surveyed the united front, calculation evident in his eyes. Without another word, he turned and left, his team of lawyers and assistants trailing behind. In the emptiness following their departure, Harold felt a sudden lightness, as if a burden he had carried for years had finally been set down. He looked around at the community that had rallied to his cause, at the meadow preserved at least temporarily, at the legacy Martha had entrusted to him. For the first time since her death, Harold Dawson felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. 6 months passed like a changing season, gradual yet transformative. Thompson Meadow lay dormant through the winter months, healing under blankets of occasional snow as nature reclaimed the scars left by Pinnacle's brief intrusion. The legal battles Harold had dreaded unfolded with unexpected swiftness. Pinnacle Development, faced with the combined pressure of state investigation, public scrutiny, and damning evidence, withdrew their claim to the property by Thanksgiving, settling for a fraction of their investment to avoid criminal charges. Commissioner Daniels resigned in disgrace after the Attorney General's investigation revealed a pattern of suspicious land deals. Dr. Ramirez faced academic censure and the loss of his research credentials. The corporate villains retreated to fight another day in another town, leaving Oak Ridge to determine its own future. On a crisp March morning, As the first hints of green began to emerge from the meadow's soil, Harold stood on his porch, coffee mug warming his hands. The winter had been kind to his arthritis, thanks largely to Martha's salve, which Kayla had helped him reproduce in larger quantities for the senior center. Scout dozed in a patch of sunlight, his coat now fully regrown, the trauma of the previous summer visible only in his increased protectiveness toward Harold and his lingering wariness of strangers in work clothes. The sound of tires on gravel announced visitors. Harold no longer tensed at such arrivals. The habit of isolation had gradually given way to acceptance of his new role in the community. Bernice's sedan led a small procession of cars, a now familiar sight on meeting days. "Right on time," Harold muttered to Scout, who raised his head at the sound of car doors opening. "Harold," Bernice called, approaching with her usual brisk energy despite the cane she had reluctantly adopted after a minor fall in January. "The signs are up." Robert brought pictures. Following behind her came the core group that had coalesced around the meadow's preservation. Robert and Elizabeth Cooper, Dorothea Sims, now sporting a stylish electric scooter for longer distances, and several other garden club members. Last to arrive was Kayla, whose veterinary clinic had expanded to include a research partnership with Professor Mitchell's department at the university. They gathered in what had once been Harold's private sanctuary but had evolved into a community workspace. The dining room now dominated by a large table covered with maps, botanical samples, and planning documents. The walls, once sparsely decorated, now displayed framed photographs of the meadow through the seasons, alongside newspaper articles documenting their victory and subsequent conservation efforts. "The Thompson-Dawson Nature Preserve," Robert announced proudly, displaying photographs of the newly installed sign at the meadow's main entrance. "Official as of this morning. Martha would approve of the hyphenation," Bernice observed, squeezing Harold's arm gently. Harold nodded, emotion momentarily tightening his throat. The establishment of the preserve had been the culmination of months of planning and negotiation. The town now officially owned the land, protected by strengthened deed restrictions and newly enacted conservation easements. A small nonprofit foundation, funded initially by a grant secured through Professor Mitchell's university connections, would manage the property in perpetuity. "The educational kiosks will be installed next week," Elizabeth reported, consulting her notebook. "Local schools are already scheduling spring field trips." "And the university research station?" Harold asked, turning to Kayla. "Breaking ground in April," she confirmed. "Small footprint, sustainable design, powered entirely by solar." The microbiology team is still in shock over what Martha discovered. 2 pharmaceutical companies have already approached about ethical licensing agreements for the antibiotic compounds. "Which brings us to the next agenda item," Bernice interjected, businesslike as always. "The Martha Dawson Memorial Scholarship Fund. With licensing revenues directed to the foundation, we'll be able to fund at least 2 full-ride scholarships annually for local students pursuing degrees in environmental science or medicine." Harold listened as the discussion flowed around him, these once strangers now finishing each other's sentences and gently disagreeing with the comfort of established friendship. 6 months ago, he would have found their presence intrusive. Now, it felt strangely essential, as if his home had finally grown into its proper purpose. Their meeting continued through the morning, addressing the practical matters of the preserve's management, trail maintenance, botanical cataloging, educational programming. Plans were made for the formal dedication ceremony in May, timed to coincide with the bloom of Martha's beloved wildflowers. As they gathered their materials to depart, Dorothea paused beside Harold. "You're different," she observed in the direct manner of someone who had known him since childhood. In a good way. Martha would be proud. Still stubborn, though, Bernice called from across the room, prompting laughter. "Some things don't change," Harold acknowledged with a slight smile. After the others had left, Kayla lingered, helping Harold clean up the coffee cups and rearrange the dining room. Their easy companionship had developed naturally over the months, professional respect evolving into friendship, and perhaps, though neither had acknowledged it directly, something more. "Want to walk the North Trail?" she suggested as they finished. "I need to check on those early spring ephemerals we transplanted last fall." Harold nodded, reaching for his jacket. Scout was already at the door, tail wagging in anticipation. The Thompson-Dawson Nature Preserve welcomed them with the subtle signs of awakening spring, skunk cabbage emerging in wet areas, the first tentative unfurling of fern fiddleheads, birdsong growing more diverse by the day. They walked in comfortable silence, Harold occasionally pointing out a plant of interest or sharing a memory of Martha's work in a particular area. The trail led them eventually to Martha's laboratory, now expanded and modernized as the preserve's research center. Solar panels gleamed on the expanded roof, and a small greenhouse attached to the southern side contained propagation beds for endangered medicinal species. Nearby, a simple wooden bench had been installed overlooking the meadow, engraved with Martha's favorite quote, "We are most faithful to those we love when we preserve what they cherished." Harold sat heavily, feeling the morning's activities in his aging joints. Kayla joined him, while Scout performed his customary patrol of the perimeter, nose testing the air for anything unusual. "I received another job offer yesterday," Kayla said after a moment, her tone carefully neutral. "Research position at Johns Hopkins. Full funding, prestigious team." Harold felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the anticipation of loss that had been his constant companion since Martha's diagnosis. "Quite an opportunity," he managed, staring straight ahead at the meadow spread below them. "It is," she agreed. "I turned it down." His head turned sharply to look at her. "Why would you do that?" Kayla's smile was gentle. "Because the most important work is happening right here." She gestured toward the meadow. "Martha started something revolutionary, not just the microbial research, but the whole approach to community conservation and traditional knowledge. I want to see it through." Relief flooded through Harold, though he tried not to show it. Oak Ridge isn't exactly a career destination for someone with your credentials. "Maybe not traditionally," she acknowledged. "But with the university partnership, the foundation funding, and the pharmaceutical licensing program developing, this could become a model for community-based research nationwide." She paused, turning to face him directly. "Besides, I've grown rather attached to the local characters." Harold felt warmth spread across his face that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. Before he could respond, Scout's sharp bark drew their attention. The dog was standing at attention near a small clearing, tail wagging with excitement rather than alarm. Rising to investigate, Harold and Kayla found themselves looking at a patch of early spring growth unlike the surrounding vegetation. Delicate green shoots pushed through the leaf litter in a perfect circle approximately 6 feet in diameter. "That wasn't here last fall," Kayla noted, crouching to examine the plants more closely. Harold knelt beside her, ignoring his protesting knees. His weathered hand gently brushed soil away from one of the shoots, revealing distinctive, serrated leaves. "Martha's ginseng variant," he identified with quiet amazement. "But we didn't plant it here." Scout circled the perimeter of the unusual growth, then sat proudly, as if presenting them with a gift. Harold suddenly remembered Martha's words in her final letter. "Scout knows where every treasure is buried." She planned this, Harold realized, wonder softening his voice. She must have established underground rhizomes throughout the meadow, insurance against loss in any one location. Kayla's eyes widened with professional appreciation. "A distributed botanical backup system. That's brilliant long-term conservation planning." They cataloged the discovery, marking GPS coordinates and taking photographs for the research team. As they worked side by side in the spring sunshine, Harold found himself sharing stories about Martha he had kept private for years. Her quiet humor, her determination, the small daily rituals that had formed the foundation of their marriage. "I used to think keeping to myself was honoring her memory," he admitted as they finally turned toward home, Scout leading the way down the trail. "Figured if I interacted with the world, I'd somehow dilute what we had." Kayla listened attentively, allowing him the space to find his words. "Turns out," Harold continued, "isolation was the opposite of everything Martha believed in. She understood connection between plants and soil, water and life, people and community." He gestured toward the meadow below. "All this happened because she connected things that seemed separate. She was very wise," Kayla said softly. "Stubborn too," Harold added with a hint of a smile. "Must be why we got along." As they crested the final hill overlooking the meadow's entrance, they could see the new sign gleaming in the afternoon sun. Thompson-Dawson Nature Preserve, protecting our natural heritage for future generations. Below the main text was a smaller dedication. in memory of Martha Thompson Dawson, whose vision preserved these waters. Near the entrance, several cars were parked, visitors already coming to explore the trails despite the preserve's not yet official opening. Among them, Harold recognized Bernice's grandchildren, a young family from the church, and several of his neighbors. "Looks like the word is spreading," Kayla observed. Harold nodded, watching as a young girl bent to examine a cluster of early wildflowers, her father kneeling beside her to explain something. The scene stirred a memory of Martha doing the same with neighborhood children decades ago, patiently identifying plants and explaining their importance. Martha used to say that knowledge kept in darkness withers like a plant without sun, Harold said, his voice rough with emotion. Said every discovery should grow in the light of shared understanding. Kayla's hand found his, warm and strong. That's exactly what's happening here. As they descended toward the preserve entrance, Scout bounded ahead, greeting the visitors with unexpected sociability. The young girl laughed as the German shepherd sat patiently while she petted his head. Looking up, she noticed Harold and Kayla approaching. "Is this your dog?" she asked, eyes bright with childish directness. "Yes," Harold replied, finding himself smiling without effort. "His name is Scout. My dad says this used to be just empty land," she continued, gesturing toward the meadow. "But now it's important because of the special water underground and the medicine plants." Harold knelt to her level, knees protesting but heart lightening. "It was always important," he told her gently. "But sometimes it takes a while for people to recognize value that isn't obvious at first glance." The girl considered this seriously before nodding. "Like friendship," she declared with the simple wisdom of childhood. "My mom says the best friends don't always seem special right away." "Your mom sounds very wise," Harold replied, exchanging a glance with Kayla. As the girl ran back to her family, Harold straightened, surveying the preserve that had once been his private burden and was now a communal treasure. Scout pressed against his leg, a constant reminder of the journey that had brought them here. "Ready to go home?" Kayla asked, still holding his hand. Harold looked at the visitors exploring the meadow, at Scout's contented expression, at the hand clasped in his. Connections he had resisted and now embraced. The weight of solitude he had carried for 3 years had been replaced by something both lighter and more substantial. Purpose shared, burden divided, joy multiplied. "Actually," he said, surprising himself with the realization, "I think I am home." In the distance, spring's first thunderheads gathered above the Ozark foothills, promising rain to nourish the awakening meadow. Life continuing its ancient cycle of renewal, as it had long before human concerns and would long after. The enduring legacy that Martha had recognized and Harold had finally come to understand. Scout raised his nose to the changing breeze, and somewhere in that eternal moment between seasons, Harold felt Martha's presence, not as a ghost, but as a truth finally, fully honored in the light of day. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and if you've watched this far, comment, "I watched to the end," and share your thoughts on this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears in the end screen. It's very emotional.